Hey guys, welcome back to the Mining Stacker YouTube channel where we cover all things crypto from the perspective of a miner. So today's video, we're going to look into Bitcoin mining for this year, 2023, and into 2024. Right, going to take kind of a deep dive, look at what's currently happening, what's happened in the past, and the likelihood of new miners coming out. Right, so if you're in the ballpark or looking at the possibility of buying a Bitcoin miner sometime in the next year, year and a half, prior to the halving, you're going to want to stay tuned. All right, so I'm going to give you a lot of facts and look at so you can see what I'm looking at so you can make a better decision as to what makes more sense for you, right? Because this is the stuff I'm researching. Because for those of you who've been watching, I've been mulling over the idea of getting one, but I've been kind of going back and forth on it. So I'm going to give you the details as to what I'm looking at, what I've been researching, right? So if that sounds interesting, guys. Stay tuned. So before we start, though, did want to give a special shout out to all of you guys, all the viewers right now. We just hit a pretty big milestone for the channel. We just hit 500 subscribers, which is pretty crazy because I wasn't expecting really even to hit like 100 for the first couple of months, right? So that's pretty big news. Want to thank you all. Want to give a bigger thank you, bigger shout out to those of you who are commenting, right? It's a big part of the reason I did want to do this channel is for the community aspect, right? If you have any questions, opinions of things, whatever, whether it's relative to that, whether you disagree, agree, whatever, put it in there, right? And I encourage anybody to respond to those things, right? Even if it's a question or whatever, I encourage you to answer. I know other people's channels, sometimes they don't like you answering, but here, please, I encourage it, okay? Special shout out to like Ultra Carbon, right? One of the viewers, he tends to comment a lot of good thoughts, a lot of good opinions out there. One good example is in that local tech video. Me and him were, talking about the thing, and the guy from local tech, Ben, actually jumped in the middle of the conversation and he was in there. So pretty cool. Another shout out to Shizmore, right? I forget which video it was, but somebody had asked a question about a specific PCU or PSU for a miner. He jumped right in, answered that thing. Beautiful, right? That is literally the best example of community, helping each other out. All the way from the newbies to the intermediate. A lot of the videos I'm doing right now are going to be more geared towards the intermediate crowd, mainly because there's not a whole lot of new people coming in the space. So a lot of the lingo I use, if you're unsure what that means or anything, the electrical, anything like that, ask questions, guys, all right? Because I know for the most part, whoever's here, it's the people who've been mining for a while now, right? We're in bear market mode. It's not too many new people coming in. It's mainly people who've already been here. So again, if you have any questions, though, newbie friendly, anything, encourage anybody to answer, please do that. So again, big shout out to all of you guys, though. All right, so let's get to the video. So we're going to be talking about Bitcoin miners and the possibility of what may be coming out, right? So if like you're thinking about getting one, whether it's worth it to get a S19, S19 XP, going to be going through that, right? So let's get right to it. Let's get to some charts. So let's switch this thing. So a lot of this information, because I've been researching a lot about ASICs, right? Like the main thing I've been having, especially ever since that local tech stuff, I've been trying to research what is the generational differences between every generation of miner that comes out. Like, what is the main difference? What is the main advancement? And it's been pretty hard to find, right? The main conclusion I've come to is that it has a lot to do with the nanometer size of the chips. So I don't know if you've noticed, but in the past couple of videos, I've been referencing that because I've been researching it for like a couple weeks now. It's pretty hard to find like concrete info because it's stuff that like Bitmain and Goldshell don't want you to know, right? They don't want to put their stuff out. Not just you, the consumer, but they don't want the competition to know, right? Because a lot of it is pretty much based on that, right? And a lot of the reason I have been researching is because of this local tech stuff, right? I've been looking at the possibility of why it looks like that it actually may be possible and what would make it possible, right? So I've been deep diving into that and finally did find a decent article with a good amount of information. So this article, it's from minerdaily.com. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like they update or do anything anymore. So this is an older article. This is from December of 2021. But there is a lot of relevant info from the previous models, which is a lot of stuff that's very hard to find, right? So what I've been doing is essentially trying to like backdate the older miners and see what the differences are between them. Like what was that gap? Like did they put more chips on the board? Like what was it exactly that increase the technology, increase the hash rate, increase the efficiency. So we're going to go over that real quick. So again, we're referencing this article. Does the Antminer S19 XP use 5 nanometer ASICs? So again, this is an older article, so some of the stuff has been answered already. Like Bitmain has already put out information that it definitely is 5 nanometer 8 chips that they're using in the XP. So kind of ignore some of that stuff, but let's go down to the meat and bones. Let's go down here to this chart. This is a chart, I've been looking for something like this. So this isn't 100%, right? These are estimations. For some of the releases, they have announced what size chip they're using, right? Other releases, they haven't. But it's mainly more of a newer trend, right? And it's mainly because of the competition between Bitmain and microbt. Yes, there's Goldshell. Yes, there's Ivy Link. Yes, there's Canaan. They're not really on that same level, though. Okay, and we're going to talk about why that's important, though, right? We'll go over that in a little bit, but let's touch on this first. So this is pretty interesting because it shows all the way back to the S1, right? Shows the size of the chips in nanometers, which isn't everything. This is another thing to consider. Just because the chip is better, it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be that big of a generational jump, right? But from what we can see here is that as the chip gets smaller, it gets more efficient, and it does get better, right? So we can see back in 2013, they had 55 nanometer size chips, and then jumping all the way to 2018, it goes all the way down to 16, right? And then going from there to now, in 4 years, it went down to 5 nanometers, right? And this is why we have those big generational gaps, those big generational leaps in efficiency, right? So the reason, I think this is a big part of what's going on with these like altcoin miners, is that most likely Goldshell had access to a lot of these older things. They had no competition, right? So like these Cadena miners, these whatever miners, they were probably using stuff from way back then, right? And now that Bitmain decided to jump in, they have access to these style or these size chips that are way more efficient that Goldshell is probably not going to be able to access, right? So we'll leave that for a whole nother video. I'm going to try to stay focused on Bitcoin. So we can see the differences there. The only one that seems kind of suspect that doesn't really make sense is this right here. So the S15 and S17. So to me, they have them labeled as most likely being 7 nanometer size chips. From what I've been researching, it seems like more likely that they are actually 12 nanometer size chips. And this will kind of explain the jump from here. Because as we see these two here, they're fairly similar, they're fairly close. The terahash is different because it's the wattage, right? It's the amount of hash boards that were in there, so that's a whole different thing. But you want to look at the efficiency, the watts of terahash. Seeing how these are pretty close, and then the next jump was huge, which doesn't make sense if they're the same size chips. But from the digging I have been doing prior to finding this article, the only thing I was able to find that was fairly consistent was this release from 2019 showing the Z11 had 12 nanometer size chips. Not just based off of ASIC miner value, but I did find a few vendors that had the individual chips as replacement parts and also listed them at that spec from different sizes. So seems like this is most likely it, and it fits the time frame, right? This released April 2019. These are, the initial drop was 2018, which typically they're going to want to use, the up-to-date size chip for that year, right? So 2018 and 19 they came out. So to me, most likely these are actually 12 nanometer size chips, both of these. This one being an improvement on that existing chip, and then the next generation being these S19s with a 7 nanometer size chip. So this would be the only point of contention for me. I would say that this is probably actually that 12 nanometer size. But again, we don't really know because they don't put that stuff out, right? So that was the only thing to me that would make sense, and that would explain these numbers a little bit better, as that jump kind of really doesn't make sense. Okay. So based off of that, let's go down a little bit. There was some interesting parts in here. And it talks about, for example, here is just comparing the efficiency of the chips, right? So now here's an interesting part from another portion of the article. So is Bitcoin's ASIC tech slowing? So when we look at the efficiency gains in Antminer chips in our first color-coded table, it seems like the amount of change is diminishing, right? The 55 nanometer, 28 nanometer, and 16 nanometer efficiency improved 26 to 64% between models, whereas the change of efficiency of the 7 nanometer and 5 nanometer is much less, between 21 to 34%. So is ASIC technology slowing? Below is a graph of the percent of efficiency change between Antminer models and between chip size. The red line is a superimposed trend line. The trend does seem to suggest that ASIC technology is slowing. So to me, it's not necessarily that it's slowing, but they're kind of getting to the point where there's going to be not many gains to be had, right? One big thing is the fact that these chips are getting so small that it's catching up to them. The other being having access to those chips, right? We're going to reference another article that there's only a small amount of manufacturers that are able to produce these size chips, okay? And everybody's competing for those chips because I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the situation in Taiwan and the CHIPS Act and the fact that Taiwan produces the majority of chips globally, right? There's literally only a few manufacturers that produce these chips at all, right? Which is a big reason of why that CHIPS Act that passed recently and then building, plants here is such a big deal, right? This is a perfect example of that. So let's go down a little bit more. But if we look at some of the other metrics, we see that although the advancements of the watts to terahash efficiency seems to be shrinking, the evolution of the terahash to watts is growing. Why is this? Well, Bitcoin miner efficiency, watts to terahash in yellow above, is a goal-seeking ratio that cannot go lower than 0. So advancements between chip sizes are slowing in broad terms. This is because as chips get smaller, it becomes harder to make microscopic improvements and dissipate heat. In a previous article, we also addressed how Moore's law with Bitcoin ASICs has been broken as chip advancements are taking longer than 2 years. Yet the terahash to watt specs in purple above are continuing to increase thanks to manufacturer improvements in machine builds and other types of engineering feats. So this is now why it's pretty much up to them to not just solely rely on that generational leap. Now they actually have to go in and try to make advancements on that chip itself or on the hash board or in some other manner to get more efficiency gains because they're not getting that type of growth, right? So I think this is a big part of the reason why we're not going to see these monumental gains. Like if the next generation, the S20, let's say, comes out, I don't think it's going to be like 250 terahash at 2800 watts. Like I think we're beyond the point of those types of gains. I think it's going to be a similar gain from the S19, the regular S19s, which use that 7 nanometer size, to the XP, where it's like a 20 to 30% gain in efficiency. I think most likely that's what the next generation is also going to yield, right? Because of this. And we'll go into a little bit more here in a second. So here's a little bit about immersion. We're not worried about that. So this is the other big thing, microchip production, kind of what we were talking about earlier. Lastly, miners are concerned with bottlenecks and microprocessor chip supplies from top foundries. Whilst there's a number of semiconductor fabrication plants worldwide, only a select few produce the cutting-edge 5 nanometer to 8 nanometer microchips used in Bitcoin mining rigs from Antminer, Avalon, and Whatsminer. As chips are difficult to get a hold of, Bitcoin mining manufacturers could be forced to limit the production of new machines, like the S19 XP in the future. Again, this is an older article. With the global chip squeeze, we could see the new manufacturers who use larger nanometer chip sizes, which are easier to get a hold of than 5 to 8 nanometer. Note that in the past, there were more Bitcoin mining manufacturers, including discontinued brands like ASIC Miner, Black Arrow, Cointerra, KNC Miners, Bondulis Tech, and more. The majority of these companies lost their competitive edge against the quickly advancing machine specs of industry leaders Bitmain, Canaan, and MicroBT. So I think this is also why Gold Shell is going to lose a big advantage, right? I think that's part of the reason that Bitmain decided to come in and wipe them out, because they seem to be most likely confident that Gold Shell will not have access to these efficient chips, at least for a few years, right? We've seen before every couple of years they get that advancement. So as that older tech comes out, they're going to be able to scoop that up. But right now, it seems like they're going to have a big enough lead where that's why that's why I said in that other video that most likely Gold Shell is almost like 2 generations behind. Meaning they're probably using like 12 nanometer size chips, something of that sort. versus what it seems like a lot of these newer altcoin miners are also using that 5 nanometer size. And if that's the case, then it's going to be a few years. It's probably going to be 2 years before we see Gold Shell come up with something competitive to that. So again, I'll dive deep into that in another video, but let's talk about another part. So the main manufacturers are TSMC, which is in Taiwan, which is the majority, right? We've heard of them. We've heard of the issues going on in Taiwan, et cetera, et cetera. Samsung is another big manufacturer. And then the third one, this is the interesting one, which I highlighted it. SMIC, Shanghai-based Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corp, produce 7 nanometer like chips. It's debated whether or not these chips are used in Avalon Miner. So the rumor mill has it that this is most likely like Gold Shell's supplier, right? This is probably where they're sourcing them from. So they're behind, right? They're not up to the 5, and now we'll touch on that in a second here. So more proof, or gives you more proof to the credibility of the stuff in this article, was able to confirm some of the newer chips, right? Like in this one, it was questioning whether the XP used 5 nanometer or not. Here's an article regarding the original S19s, right? Which we can see that this is a blog actually directly from Bitmain showing that they did have the 7 nanometer size chips in the S19. So with the custom built 7 nanometer chip from Bitmain, S19 series has set a new standard. So this is a blog that's direct from Bitmain. So that 100% confirms those size chips in the S19. And then for the XP, they didn't release a similar press statement, but a lot of news came from people who went to the WDMS for this year, right? This was not this year, it was the previous year, where they confirmed in presentations there. We can see this article here where they kind of debuted it. This was like a promo release for it, but here we can see specifically Bitmain's Antminer S19 XP will also boast 5 nanometer chip technology, and the semiconductors come from Taiwan. So this does confirm that the S19 XP is using those size chips, right? So we can come to the conclusion that, as far as basing it off of the chart that's here, that this is definitely that, which has been confirmed since then. This is definitely that. The S19s and the regular S19 Pros definitely use the 7 nanometer size chips. And most likely, we can see they have these listed as 7 nanometer, but again, based off of the other thing, to me, it's most likely that these are actually 12. Okay, and that would explain the difference here. But again, you can see the efficiency gains are only like that 20 to 30% per generation, and that's most likely what will happen if an S20 that's on a 3 nanometer size chip will release. So now let's talk about the prospects of what's going to come out, right? To me, it seems based off of what they're currently manufacturing that we will not see a 3 nanometer size chip from Bitmain coming here in the near future. Okay, most likely the next release, if we go based off of this and what's happened in the past, is that we will have a revision of this 5 nanometer size chip, meaning that like 10 to 15% gain in efficiency. So most likely think of like it'll probably S19 XP Pro, most likely, and it'll debut sometime possibly the end of this year, right? We know they tend to announce the new miners in November when they do their mining summit. So if there is any kind of indication, that's probably when we'll hear about it. But realistically, they're still selling these older size chips in the hydros, right? So that's another reason why I don't think we'll see 3 nanometer size chips, at least not from them. And then another reason, we did find a little proof as to why that is, and it's because they're just now really starting to manufacture these things. Okay, and we know that Bitmain doesn't have the money to compete with like the likes of Apple and Samsung and such. So those phone manufacturers are going to get first dibs on those. Okay, so it's more than likely to me that we will not see, from Bitmain at least, a 3 nanometer Bitcoin ASIC before the halving. Okay, so chances are, again, we will see a S19 XP Pro, right, which will be a little bit more efficient, but will it be worth the price, okay, compared to the XP? Because even right now, comparing it between the S19J and the XP, especially with the S19J with that firmware update, there's not that big of a gap in efficiency. Is it really worth more than double? To me, not really. But I think the reason that they're keeping the XP at that level is because that's what's going to be sold all the way up to the halving and beyond. And chances are, guys, you really got to think about availability. Okay, they are available now. But again, if this is probably going to be the best that we're going to be able to get prior to the halving, then this may be the one you want to look at. Okay. The price point is the issue for me. To me, it is overpriced. But again, I think it's that way because they know that this is what they're going to have for the next year and a half. And that the gain for the XP Pro won't be as significant, right? So they're going to keep that price sort of inflated, at least until a form of competition comes out. Because even the stuff from like microbt from the Whatsminer, they're not as efficient, right? And that's the main reason I haven't really covered them, because they're just not as efficient, okay? And accessibility is hard. It's harder to purchase because they tend to only sell in bulk. It seems like they mainly cater to like that crowd, to the farm crowd. It's harder to buy just, well, let's say just one, right? So I know that's a lot of info to digest, but I'm letting you know why I'm making these predictions. I'm presenting to you why instead of just seeing rumors. Like, I get annoyed seeing that all the time. Oh, rumor mill is this. When it's not a rumor, it's not something that they're hearing. A lot of times it's just their prediction. They're just labeling it a rumor. So I'm letting you know why I'm thinking the way I'm thinking, right? The things I'm looking at. And based off of this, to me, that's the most likely scenario. Because again, guys, we're so close to that halving. Accessibility and availability is something you really got to consider. Because again, if Bitcoin does start pumping leading into the halving, then we're going to have the same scenario we had last bull market, where yes, they're still for sale, but the price is now 5x and the minimum order quantity is 50, which again is we're not going to be able to get them, right? Just like what happened last time, where it was either if you weren't a farm, then you had to purchase them at 15K, right? So you got to look at those things and see what makes sense, right? But again, like for me, for example, I've been mulling on it, but the XP is too expensive and it may not drop a whole lot, right? Because again, the other big thing we do know is that the price is directly correlated with the price of the asset, specifically with Bitcoin, right? Let's say we did hit the bottom already. This may be the bottom for the XP prices. That's something to factor in. But if you're more in the camp that, nope, in 2 months, we're going to go down to 8K, then that's going to be the bottom, right? So you have to do your research. You have to base it off of certain things. Again, this is what I'm looking at. This is what I'm presenting. And it's up to you to make that determination if you're thinking about getting one, okay? To me, realistically, the price does need to come down more. Like it's still, they just dropped another 10%. So the XPs, like the 134s, for example, are in that like, I think they're down to 4,000, 4,300 range, right? So just even like a month ago, they were in the 4,700 to 5,000 range. Okay, so it has dropped. I do see them dropping a little bit more. For me, they have to drop below 3, right? Especially considering how cheap the S19Js are. Okay, I've been seeing even like the 100 terahash models now for under 1,000. That's crazy, right? Is that 20% gain in efficiency worth 3 to 4x? That's what you have to consider, right? And even then with the XP and the potential next model, is that possible only 20% efficiency gain going to be worth it? Considering that the price is probably going to be higher and the availability is probably going to be rough, right? Because even looking on Bitmain's website, even things with like older tech, those hydro models that have the older 7 nanometer size chip, that have like more this type of efficiency, their pre-orders are all the way into the summer. Okay, so they're still mass producing these chips. They're still trying to clear all that stuff out. Okay, so that's another reason why I think that the XP might be your best bet from Bitmain, right? Not necessarily overall, from Bitmain. We're going to go into that here in a second. So a big piece of news did come out this summer. Didn't really pay much attention to it, but again, because I've been like researching it so hard, I was able to put a couple things together. So again, we referenced the S19 XP and Whatsminer, BT, the Whatsminer, the M50, I believe, they are also on 5 nanometer size chips. Their main manufacturer, I believe, is Samsung though. But right now they are on the same level. But it looks like this coming generation with 3 nanometer size chips, it looks like microbt, which is Whatsminer, may beat Bitmain to the punch for the first time. And this is why. So I found this article, Samsung beats TSMC to be the first to produce 3 nanometer size chips. Lower power consumption, improved performance, and a second generation of the technology on the way. So reading through the article, according to one source, Samsung's initial customer that will use the early 3nm silicon will be a Chinese company called Pan Semi that specializes in chips designed for Bitcoin mining. Huge news, right? But who is Pan Semi? So did a little more research and did find this article. Okay, so we see at the top of the article, this is from Bullfrag. New 3nm Samsung chips may reach Bitcoin miners first. And here, so Samsung will sell the nano chips or semiconductors to Pan Semi, which is a subsidiary of the company that gives life to the Whatsminer ASICs. So they are going to have first dibs on 3nm size chips. So now we have to think of the timeline, right? Even though they do have that contract, is Samsung going to be able to produce them in time for this halving, or will they have that contract? Because right now I did find another article stating that they're not getting the type of yield that they wanted, right? Because they're actually in production now. Okay, I did find a few more articles saying that they've been in production since Q3, Q4 2022, but they're not getting the type of yield that they want. Okay, and TSMC, they are starting to do theirs, but it seems like it's going to be pretty far behind. So although they may get it first, chances are the new miners may not come out until that bull market's in full swing. Meaning that if we are able to buy them, they're going to be crazy inflated, number one. And number two, it's probably going right to the farms. Okay, so we're probably not even going to have a chance at them. Okay, so most likely to me, based off of what we know and how long it takes after these types of articles come out, it's a couple of years before they're actually in the chips, in the ASICs. Okay, so there's a very, very high likelihood that these, although they're going to be first, again, we may not have access to them. Okay, so that's one more thing to keep into consideration, because again, the halving is next year already, guys. Okay, it's about a year and a half, but technically that's not that far away. Okay, especially considering all these things. We'll probably get more info again in November for that mining summit for Bitmain. That's when they tend to release more news. So if Whatsminer does release something more significant, which they have released quite a few things, they have made a few advancements. I'm going to do another video regarding those, like what's coming from them, right? But again, the main thing we want to look at is the efficiency and what we're looking at, okay? So again, if you are considering getting one, you have to take all of this into consideration. Okay, do your own research. But again, this is my research and this is what I'm basing my thought process off of. To me, based off of these things that I've presented, I think we will get from Bitmain the S19 XP Pro, something like that, sometime next year. Probably debuting in November. We'll have some kind of tidbits on it. Maybe not though. Maybe they will wait till the spring. But again, it's not going to be released until that Bitcoin halving, okay? And then you have to factor in whether or not us at-home miners will be able to access that, okay? And if we are, again, it's probably going to be at a much crazier price, okay? So factor all these things in. You have to consider whether that efficiency gain will be worth it, okay? Because even right now, like the debate between getting the S19J and the S19 XP, is it really worth that premium? On paper, yes, because you look at one and one's profitable and one's not. But what is the difference? Is 20% really a difference when we're predicating everything based off of the fact that Bitcoin will, at bare minimum, not bare minimum, again, none of this is financial advice, but we're predicting that it's going to go up at least, let's say, 4 or 5x. Okay? Is that dollar something difference in electrical going to be that huge of a difference? You got to think about these things, right? So again, hopefully this kind of opened your eyes a little bit, kind of gave you some insight, because I know a lot of you have been thinking about getting them. I know I definitely have. I've been mulling over. I've been like wanting to so bad for the longest. Ever since the XP was announced, way last year, I've been like, the thought of getting one has been on my mind. But realistically, I'm not sure, man. Because Bitcoin, again, like we've seen, you know, I've covered all these like bigger farms and these companies. That's your competition. Right? That's another big thing you have to consider. Look at the hash rate, how that's been going. So these are all things you really got to think about, because again, you're buying this ASIC, it's a huge investment. It's a lot of money, right? They're a lot cheaper now, obviously, than they were back then. But again, it's something to factor in, right? Especially if you're limited on space. If you're at a farm and you have a crazy amount of space, I'd be stacking up these S19s right now. I'd be lowballing people for like $700, $500. See who buys, who bites. Especially if we, have this crappy price action, and I'd be stacking them up, right? But fortunately, don't have that kind of crazy electrical. Still may do it though, right? Because it'd be worth it to stack it and then just sell it in the bull market. But that's a whole nother thing. But just some things to think about, guys. Kind of open up your eyes. No, it was kind of a long one, but again, I want to show you as to why I'm thinking these things and not just based off of some rumor or something that has nothing to do with it. I'm presenting you all this information so you can make the best decision for you. Okay? All right, well, guys, well, thank you for watching. Again, please comment, like, and subscribe. And I am out.